Welcome everyone to this TELedvisors webinar. We've called it AI in Practice and the Promise of Open Educational Resources. We've got Associate Professor Rachel Fitzgerald here today and John Raiti from UQ. And then after that, we'll have Lauren Halcombe-Smith as well. So before I do anything else, I will acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm talking to you today, which are the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, First Nations owners of the lands where QT now stands. And we pay respects to elders, laws, customs, and creation spirits. These lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning. We talk quite a lot about Gen AI in today's session, as we do in most sessions nowadays. But yeah, and so it's interesting and important, I think, to reflect a bit on how knowledge is produced, how knowledge is passed on, and elders play a very important role in that process and always have for thousands of years. Gen AI complicates this significantly, and it creates all sorts of ethical issues. So I'll ask you to reflect a bit on that. I'll stop sharing this and I'll start sharing Rachel's. Okay, so just a little bit of an introduction. Rachel is an associate professor at the University of Queensland and deputy associate dean academic in the Faculty of Business, Economics and Law. She leads strategic initiatives in teaching quality, digital pedagogy, and responsible AI. And we'll find out what that means, hopefully. And she's the national chair of the Teaching and Education Focused Academic Network, TEFA. Rachel and I also work together on lots of scholarship projects, including a book that is hopefully going to be submitted by the end of this year, or if not before. Over to you, Rachel. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Hank. And that's not hopefully, it will be. Remember, that's the word. That's the words we're using. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. This is, I think, a really good outcomes project that I want to share with you. And I think you'll find the kind of the approach and the outcomes of interest. And I think it's something that's easily replicable anywhere. And I'd also like to, just following up from Hank's, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm meeting you from here. And I'm only down the river from QUT. And also to part of the acknowledging the like elders past and present and any Indigenous academics or any Indigenous people that we have in this meeting today. But one of the things that I think is important around sharing in kind of stories the way we're going to tell about these cases that we're talking about is also the idea that we take a lot of practices from Indigenous culture around that storytelling and learning and thinking of ourselves as communities. I think it's such a valuable thing to think about in the context of learning from each other and to remember that we're not all trying to do this on our own. And hopefully this project shares some of those thoughts with you. Hank, if you can move it forward, please. Now we'll go to the next one. So I'm not going to be talking for ages. John's here as well. He's going to talk about an example of one of the projects as part of this. But just to give a bit of context of why I thought this particular project was important. We were hearing this all started around the start of 2024. And obviously, you know, Gen AI and the impacts of Gen AI had been talked about quite a lot at that stage. And particularly what we were hearing is a lot of big voices telling us about how it was going to have these kind of impacts, whether it was positive or negative. There was a lot of big voices out there. There wasn't an awful lot of voices, though, telling us how that was going to happen. And there was no evidence practice. I mean, it was early days, so we weren't expecting a lot, but there was a hell of a lot of big voices, big opinions, as I like to see them as. A lot of people saying a lot of things, but not really kind of breaking it down into, well, what does that really mean? And I think one of the things that really inspired me is I went down to the University of Sydney on one of their first kind of their conferences that Danny Liu organized, where it was a lot of practice-based pieces. And so there was a lot of people that had been encouraged, that you said, to go and try new things in the classroom and to try using AI. And when I went down there, I was actually thinking, there were short kind of pieces of people just presenting what happened. They were talking about the positives and negatives. They weren't particularly subtle projects because there wasn't an awful lot of evidence base behind it. It was more just innovation and just trying things out. But it was just such a positive place to be. And again, that idea of just sharing lots of experiences so everybody could learn from that. I thought we need more of this. We really need more of this, So I came back to UQ thinking, well, could I organize something like that across UQ? And I was like, the scale of it was like just phenomenal, to try and think, how would I get so many people involved and how would I get that off the ground and do something? And obviously, and I don't want to just copy what you said they're doing because, that's not the done thing. So what I came up with was this particular project. So what I was looking for was people who are willing to experiment with AI in their courses with their own students, but to do it on a basis of taking it on as a subtle project. So that means they were going to do some evidence-informed practice. So it would either be, they would be thinking very carefully around, what they were trying to do, what they were trying to achieve, how they were going to evaluate that, and then they were going to reflect on that. Now, obviously, because it's subtle and because I'm involved in quite subtle projects myself, the important part of that is to have some student voice as well. So it was really important to me that these projects would be designed with and evaluated with the students. Okay. And for me as well, what I was also trying to really achieve was to kind of create a community that was developing these emerging AI leaders, but not AI leaders as in, like the big voices, the ones that everybody is very familiar with. But it was also to try and create leaders within the university that are actually willing to trial things and then share with others. Remember, like, I'm talking to the right audience here. I know I am. But when we're talking about digital learning, and every time digital learning comes in and we're trying to make it something that we want everyone to get involved in, we go for those that are actually willing to go and talk about their practice as a way to encourage others to get involved. And that's what I was trying to do here. And the big area as well for me is around developing trust. So you'll all know that the conversation to this point was, not only are we all really facing with that idea of, the students are cheating, AI, it's all cheating, and then the assessments are true, it's what's going on. But actually what was worrying me was that, yes, and I'm also quite involved in projects at UQ to sort that out. But the piece that was really worrying me was the fact that the students were going, this is all rubbish. The lecturers are using AI and I don't like any of the stuff they're doing and I don't trust them. And I thought that was something that we weren't really having a conversation about, and that needs to be explored a little bit more. Go to the next slide, please, Hank. So just on that critical element, I think if we're going to talk about an area that is going to be a real problematic area for universities, I think it's this piece around trust. We just not thinking about what we're being transparent about in how we use AI is actually a real problem. So whether it's just being used for, creating slides, whether it's being used in marking, the problem is if it's not actually explicit, then students are making assumptions. So if you talk to students, you'll hear them saying things like, I think they marked up AI, I think my feedback was AI, I don't think that anyone read my work. And I think, there's an awful lot of research that's happened, of course, over the last year. That big project with Tim Fons, Kelly Matthews, etc. They were talking to hundreds of students. And it was like, what was really coming out was this ambiguity was problematic. And it's causing a breakdown in confidence and trust with each other. And that's not where the problem should be. We shouldn't be questioning trust between, our tutors and our students. The black box that's in the middle is actually the problem, not the relationship that's happening above it. But that's not what's happening. So getting back to my project, right? So now I've done the whole background to that thing. Next slide, please. Okay, so the project itself was there's teaching innovation grants at UQ. And you can bid for quite a lot of money. I did not bid for a lot of money. I was just thinking about, I just need some money to give students to get involved, right? So I just wanted the student partner money. So it's not a huge funded project. The idea behind it was to recruit any course coordinators and/or learning designers who are involved in redeveloping their courses in small ways to engage with AI, and it would be part of their teaching and learning. To be part of this project, students had to be co-researchers and partners as part of the work that was going on. So that was done in various different ways. My vision at the start was that it would be true student partnership. That didn't quite work out for every case that's in here, and that's okay, because it's good to have an exploration of different ways that happened. But in all of them, the students were very aware of how AI was being used, and they were able to have a conversation about, what their experiences were of that. So that the reflection came in some of the cases from both sides, both students and staff, and sometimes it's from just the course coordinator perspective. But the project was around that idea that we are being explicit about what's being used. We're talking about, has it got a good or a negative impact? What really happens? It's all reflective. Looking at it, we used the TPAC model, the TPAC framework, as a way of giving people a guidance as to how to explore this. So it's thinking about how the connections between the technology, the pedagogy, and the content work together, but also really deep thinking about what you're trying to achieve before you even start. Now, most people use that TPAC lens. Some did slightly different ways. Again, I didn't really push it to be totally, wedded to this, but it was a good way if people were not familiar with SoTL to give them a start in the process. And what it's created is a number of cohort cases from totally all different disciplines, from all the faculties across UQ. We have representation from everywhere. Everyone has a chapter that's either co-written with the students or has a section in there from the students. And it's going to be put together in an open education resource, which you're soft launching on the 6th of November. Otherwise, I would have given you all a link to it today, but there's a big launch for it. And it's really exciting because it isn't actually cases where we're going, woo, AI is doing this or AI is doing that. It's actually a really deep thing about the impact that AI has had in a particular situation. And if you go to my next slide, Hank, I can just give you some of these. There's more cases than this. I just thought I'd give you a taster for some of the things that were coming through. So we'll see that, we've got things like dentistry, and the exploration of using AI in lots of different ways. And that, it was done with intentions to kind of increase clarity, and then also this feedback from students about what they really don't like about it. And we see in business, it was to build like AI literacy and ethical reasoning as well. And then in medicine, they had an opportunity to play around with virtual patients. There's podcasts that were automated from AI that were used. And again, we have some negative feedback from students on that one too. And then education as well, where, they were using AI to try and enhance pedagogical creativity. And what it actually came out was actually sometimes it ended up just being a lot of the same thing. So they're kind of interesting. They all sounded quite negative there, but no, there's some really positive outcomes, and there's some really quite interesting nuances that we probably wouldn't have known, except these have been explored over time. The other thing is these are action learning. So most of these cases have been developed over 2 semesters, and all of the people that are involved in this, as I've talked about becoming AI leaders, actually are going through that action learning again. So they're going to do another cycle, and they're going to try and fix the things that came up the students said they weren't happy with. Okay, I think if you go to the next one, please, Hank. Again, and as I said, this is quite a replicable project. It was a really simple one to do, okay? By giving people templates in order to help them to do the SoTL piece, or as like many of you are able to kind of co-work with course coordinators as well. So in that, some of these cases have actually been written by the learning designers, because they've been much more deeply involved in the actual practice of like what that curriculum changes, and also been involved in the evaluation. Not all of them, some of them are written by the course coordinators themselves, but it's really easy to then just take that approach of just giving people a really simple template to say, okay, so here's how I want you to explore what you're trying to do. Here's what you've got to do before you start, here's what you've got to do during, and here's what you've got to do at the end, and then reflect. And I did have a few nerves about whether or not my cases would come through on time, but everybody has come through. So in this book, we'll have 9 cases altogether, and there's still more filtering through. It's an open education resource, so I can update it. And so over the next year, you'll see more. Okay, so now that's all about the project. I'm now going to pass over. I think that's it. Is there any more slides? Oh yeah, I'm going to pass over to John, because he's going to talk a little bit, I think, where TPAC comes in. TPAC was brilliant. If you're looking for that kind of an approach to help people to understand what they're doing, I think that's one of the strongest ones. You'll see Mairead practically talks about it. And there's the Punya Mishra is another, has written the framework for it. Really, really good resources to use if you're not sure about, where you should start with this if you're talking to people about it. The other part, really important part is that co-creation with students where possible. The student voice in this is the strongest part of it. It's the most interesting part, right? Because then you really hear that thing I was talking about where, they're not sure about what's going on, and you can hear their reservations about what's being done. So I think that this kind of pushing away from that tech determinism of like AI must change things and listen to what students actually are experiencing is actually means that we are more in control about how this should be changed in the future. And as I said, the trust is really changing if you're really transparent about AI, and that means discussing it about the ethics of what you're doing, and kind of the actual what's happening, and then also just to have some care about what's going on. So the conversations, the actual interest in what the students are experiencing, all makes a big difference to the feedback that you get for these things. Okay, I think that's everything for me. I'm happy to take any questions at the end. I am going to pass over to John because he's just going to talk about one of those projects that's part of this, and also he's helped me to put this whole book together. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Rachel. Did you want to answer questions now, or I will do it at the end? All right, I'll introduce John Raiti. John is a learning designer currently working at the University of Queensland, specializing in enhancing teaching, learning, and assessment practices within the Faculty of Business, Economics, and Law. And prior to that, he was a senior manager and digital publisher at John Wiley & Sons Educational Publishers, and a secondary school teacher. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you, Rachel, and hello, everyone. I too acknowledge the traditional owners and elders, past, present, and emerging, and I'm excited to talk about this chapter, which Rachel gave me this fabulous opportunity to write this case study during my time working in the School of Economics here at UQ. So just to give you a little bit of context, it was a qualitative study led by my colleague, Dr. David Smerdon, which started back in 2023. And David was teaching behavioral economics course, and he was really curious about how the students were using ChatGPT. And he designed this written research proposal assessment task, and through that, we were trying to get student voice about how they were using AI to put together this proposal. So just to give a little bit more about the assessment task, students had to generally come up with something related to behavioral economics, and it had to be their own research questions. So David actually showed the students how to use Google Scholar and try and design a question which hadn't been answered before. And he also scaffolded them through, the methods they can use to try and answer that question. 1,500 words, and of course they're allowed to use a Gen AI tool, which in this case is ChatGPT. Now, if you look at the image or the AI generated image on the right hand side, I'll try to represent the kind of learning environment that David was trying to establish. So very much active learning, and you'll see AI bias involved up on the wall there. David spent a lot of time in scaffolding this task on AI literacy. He designed a number of activities for the students where they had to put prompts into ChatGPT, and then they would have a discussion and analyze the outputs. So in that, he was teaching them about how large language models are trained and how that does create a bias, which the students need to be aware of. So the implementation of the task was very much, as I've mentioned, focused on active learning workshops over about 4 weeks until the due date. And as mentioned, there was a heavy focus on critiquing the AI outputs and building that literacy. From a pedagogical perspective, a lot of emphasis was placed on continuous feedback, assessment for learning. So students would generally turn up to class with what they have done or had done in the past week, got some feedback from their peers, from the tutor. It was very much a workshop sort of environment. And that included, I think, about a week before the due date, the students in their tutorials had to present a 2-minute pitch to get some feedback from their peers and also from the tutor before they finalized the final submission. These are the research questions. David, in particular, was looking at question 1, which is how and to what extent do students use Gen AI tools in written tasks? I was very, very keen also to look at the implications of using Gen AI tools for teaching practices and what do teachers actually need to know to integrate Gen AI effectively when they're implementing an assessment task. And as Rachel has mentioned, the TPAC framework has been a very useful lens here. It was useful for me in writing the case study, but it was also useful for David and myself when we were thinking about how he was going to implement the assessment. So we spent a lot of time looking at that interplay between the technology, the content, and the pedagogy. And I think in the end we did find a nice little sweet spot in the middle where the learning was enhanced. At the end of the task, David sent out a survey. We got a fairly good response rate of 37%, 69 students. 2/3 of those respondents said they use Gen AI tools for their research proposal. And on the right-hand side there, you can see the thematic analysis, the general themes coming through, and the number of responses related to that. And just to unpack that a little further, I just included some of the comments made by the students, which were very interesting. So if we take idea generation and brainstorming, yes, they did find it to be a good starting point and coming up with basic ideas. In terms of writing and structuring, again, they found ChatGPT to be useful. The literature search is interesting because the comment there says yes, it was useful in finding relevant literature, although some suggestions were not reliable. So hopefully that emphasis on AI literacy helped the students to identify, you know, what wasn't reliable for their particular task. In terms of grammar and error checking, again, students generally found it pretty useful, like Grammarly. And likewise for statistical and data analysis, again, the students did find that fairly useful. And then the last area or theme is the overall usefulness. And students generally across the board said, look, it didn't really have that much effect on their learning. ChatGPT did help, but in the end, it was what they learned in class that was probably more useful. It helped them to analyze the outputs really well, and then, of course, use that as a starting point to build on. when we reflect on this particular case, obviously we were quite happy with the Gen AI literacy. That was a big focus, particularly for the students. We see in the comments how they were able to identify weaknesses in the output and critique that. I think it also highlighted also in terms of Gen AI literacy for academics, because if we need to teach that, obviously we need to have a pretty good handle ourselves. It showed us that the pedagogical approach is really important. I've mentioned that the TPACK model was a very useful framework, but if we unpack that a little further, one of the big learnings was about the focus on the learning process and not just sort of focusing on the final output and having that ongoing feedback for the students all the way through. So it does change with traditional pedagogy, uh, and it does have implication for resourcing and a whole heap of other questions as well. But we could see that if we get the pedagogy to match the use of the tool and the task, well, we're moving in the right direction. And just finally, just to share with you, in case you want to look this up, David did write a research paper on this. That's the reference there. So they'll be in the slides, which I believe will be shared at the end. So that's pretty much all from me. Oh, sorry, I do. Oh, yes, that's pretty much all for me at the moment. So thank you.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Rachel. We do have a couple of minutes for some questions for Rachel and John. If there are any questions at this point, you can raise your hand or you can put a question in the chat. I have a question for John. Just right at the end, you said you focus on the learning process rather than the product. Is that in what you talked about? Is that reflected in the assessment as well? Have you changed
Yeah,
the assessment in the process?
yeah, pretty much so. So the David did a really good job in scaffolding the whole task, and in that he was basically sort of saying, well, this is where you need to be up to week by week, and to bring it along, and that way we can get some meaningful and constructive feedback to you as soon as possible. So yeah, it was a very deliberate approach that we did take. And it's been really good to share this example when I do speak to other academics, and trying to help them with that mind shift from output to process. Um, it's a bit challenging, again, because of the way universities are traditionally structured, our delivery model. But we are seeing some nice little changes starting to happen. So I'm really excited that this being socialized even further when the book is launched. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. I
I'm
was
just
going
going to
to
say,
ask. Oh, sorry. Yes.
sorry, I'll answer the one that Sharon posted in the chat, which is about how you can get access to the book. So I said we're doing a soft launch on the 6th of November, and that it's an open education resource. So it basically is available on the web. So as soon as we have done the kind of formal launch, which is basically through Italy here at UQ, that they're going to get an opportunity to say where their good funding went to. And so as soon as that's done, the link will be available. I'm very happy to share it.
Cool. Thank you, Rachel. I was going to ask you about the student partners thing. You said every project had to have student partners involved. How did you select them? Was my
So,
question. Did you have particular criteria for that, or?
so the idea, there was a kind of a different ways that could be enacted, and it was kind of back down to the schools themselves. So wherever this project was coming from, the idea was the money could be used for, so generally to pay students to be part of the whole experience. So that could be the entire cohort could be part of it. And then you could use the money because it wasn't huge amounts of money. It was about like $1,000 per project, a little bit more if people had to do above and beyond. So it could either pay for the actual partnership, so they could decide the students could actually be one leader or one or two leaders, which is what most people want for two students, who would then basically be part of running their focus groups for it, and then they would be part of the writing up of either the focus groups or they would actually contribute to the chapter. So in some cases, they've actually contributed to the chapter as well. The students themselves were chosen so because of that project, because they had to be more or less involved and being with the cohort, they mostly came from within the cohort as well. So so the conversation at the start was, we're doing this project, we're looking for one or two volunteers to be the people that are going to like capture what's going on and thoughts that's going on. And then, there's just a tiny pot of money that's available to do that. And so that's where most of them came from.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Before we move on, I should say that I'm just presenting this, but Sharon Altena is here, she's pretty much organized the whole thing. So I just want to acknowledge that, Sharon, and thank you, because she organized this whole thing while she was on leave as well, which is, yes, mostly my fault. So thank you, Sharon. Okay, so Lauren, you're happy to share your slides at your end?
Yep.
All right, I'll just introduce you. Dr. Lauren 𝐎𝐸𝐞𝐧 is a library professional and a third space academic, there's that term again, with a PhD in educational studies and a background in teaching, research, and leadership in higher education. She's currently a lecturer open education with Deakin University Library, and is focused on research and academic capability building related to open educational resources, OER, and OER-enabled practices. I'll leave it there, Lauren. There's a lot more
no, that's fine.
be said, but
that was
yeah.
a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Hank.
All right.
And thank you, Sharon, for all your beautiful coordinating to have me here, and to Colin and Sue, who suggested that I come and speak to this group. I do have some slides that I will share. And I'll... Right, so hopefully you're seeing those. And yeah,
all
well,
good.
Lovely to be here and to be chatting with you today about a tool that Deakin Library has been piloting to basically see if it's useful for making finding OER useful, easier, I should say. And I guess that the idea behind that is to address one of the big challenges that we see with OER discovery, consideration, adoption is that it just takes a long time to find them. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge I'm coming to you today from the beautiful lands of the Wurundjeri people, who neighbor the Boonwurrung country, which is where I live, learn, work, and play for the most part. And that a lot of what I'm sharing today is really from the team, from the open education team, particularly the amazing work that our two open education librarians do, Angie and Lisa. And everything that I present is really standing on the shoulders of them as the giants. And you may actually have heard from them before and seen some of these slides. And that's, yeah, I'm a great cannibal of slides. So if you recognize something, that's by design. This is what I will be doing today. Here's my plan, where we're going on this beautiful journey. I do have a little activity for us to sort of check in and generate some interest. I will do a little lightning talk on why OER and why it's important. And you may be an OER aficionado, and that is all old news for you, and that's fine. You can enjoy the pictures that I have on the slides. And then I'll talk a little bit, the main sort of section is the reflections on Scylla, which is the OER discovery tool that we've been piloting, and sort of what we've learned 6 months in. And then I'll open it to the group to sort of crowdsource stories from you about how you have showcased, increased the visibility, increased the discoverability of OER or any other OER awesomeness that you have to share. But before I do that, I thought I might just begin with a little bit of positionality, because you might be thinking, who the heck is this person and why is she here today? Also, because I am involved in open education, being open and transparent through positionality is sort of part of what we do. So yes, just trying to model the principles of openness. So I'm originally from Canada, which may surprise you. Just kidding, based on the accent. But my parents are Polish and Australian. So the idea of being third space in my professional life is nothing new to me. I've been third space my whole life. But I actually grew up in Tasmania, which is where my dad's family is from. And then I had an identity crisis in my teens, as one would expect. And to reinforce that, I went back to Canada, where I learned that I'm not quite Canadian, not quite Australian. But what I did learn is that I really love teaching. And that is, that was really where I found my calling, was as a teacher. I started teaching ESL just as sort of a way to pay the bills, and soon fell in love with it and became really, really good at cutting up little bits of paper. And that led me to do my master's in teaching English as a second language, and then my PhD in educational studies. And from there, things just took off with a career in higher education. And it's been really exciting. I've worked in academic roles in research and teaching, supervising student teachers, going on prac into high schools and elementary schools. And I've done professional work in academic capability building, learning design, love learning designers, you're my people, and leadership and management. And I guess when I look back, the principles of open have always been sort of a through line. And I really believe, above all else, that we're here to create the conditions for students to thrive. And it's my belief that those conditions are optimized when learning is student-centered and when it's participatory. And I think that comes right back to my very beginnings as a teacher of ESL, because you can't really learn how to communicate in another language if you're not student-centered and it's not participatory. So anyway, what I hope is that, oh, and fun fact, that castle is the Royal Road's main admin building, and it's also Professor X's castle in the X-Men movies. All right, we're gonna do a little temperature check, and to do that, I'm gonna pop out of my slides here. Actually, before I do that, that's the Mentimeter that we're going to, and I will also put that information, in the chat, but I had it all queued up with my copy pasting, and then I started taking notes in the last session and lost my. So we're going to go to this. All right. And then there's the QR code again, if you want to use your phone. I'll just count to 10. All right, and then I'll go to the Menti. All right, let's jump in. Can I get some thumbs up in the Menti to show that you're there? Ah, it's beautiful. Look at those. That's what I like to see. All righty. Now, I really want everyone to be comfortable, so please pull up a chair, whichever one calls to you. Very nice choices. I love people that love books. I love books too. That's why I work in a library. And it's a very cute doggy. Beautiful choices. Beautiful. Excellent. Next, if you need a drink, grab a coffee. Or a tea, I suppose. Now, people who have worked with me or know me know that I start every day, I spend most of my day filling up my cup from my giant flagon of tea every day. I'm a real tea drinker. Thank you. Alrighty, let's get into the actual stuff. Where are you at with open educational resources? Are you like, I have no idea what that is? Teach me. Kind of curious, maybe it's kind of new. You're into it, you love it, you're amazed, you think it's great. You're super confident. You've used OER, you've supported academics in putting them in their course, or you've put them in a course of your own, or you're just a super user. You're all over OER as a thing. Maybe you've published an OER. You've got a pretty broad spectrum. Cool. That's great. To be honest, I was a bit nervous that everyone was going to be like 5 and 6, and then I would have nothing new or novel or interesting to say to you. So thanks to all you curious cats out there. And what's your current mood about AI? Since we're here to talk about OER and AI. A couple of people are not into it. Maybe some people just dipping their toes in the water, taking it slow. Some people on the fence, confident, no problem, part of my work. And again, we've got some super fans. Great. I would love now, just before we go back to the presentation, just curious for a little bit of open-ended, one word, couple of words, merging those two ideas together, OER, AI, what interests you about AI-enabled OER searching? Yeah, great. What it adds. What does it add? Does it increase the ease of searching? We will see. No spoilers. Yeah, what are the possibilities? What are the ethics? Great one, yeah. Does it help us find things more easily? Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Does it make things easier to find? I think I kind of sold that to you in the title of the presentation. But yeah, I think that it's a big priority. The convenience, the possibilities, the discovery. Who is writing it? Okay. Concerned about bias. Yeah, speedy responses. Amazing. Great. Well, it seems like there is something here for most people. What I will do is go back to my slides now. And I might just leave this. I'll just leave that there. And if you have other things you want to add, you can. All right. I want to be able to see you while I'm presenting. All right, so I'm gonna because there were some people who were curious, but perhaps not super across OER, I will give a little bit of a lightning talk. You may have seen some of these slides before if you've heard me present or my colleagues Angie or Lisa, and that's cool. So OER are basically, and as most of you probably know, they're teaching and learning materials that are free to access, and they're also free to adapt, basically, and share. So essentially, the key difference between an OER and a traditional textbook that you get from the library or you buy from the bookshop is that it can be changed, updated, reformatted, remixed, and then just redistributed as something new. And as I know that many of you are learning designers or in similar roles, you can just imagine the possibilities that opens up pedagogically. And we know that OER are important for a number of reasons. This is an old survey from Deacon's student union from back in 2019, and we keep meaning to ask DUSA to run this again. It basically shows us in a pretty, rough and ready kind of methodology that a lot of students are basically not buying the textbooks. So we have up to 70% of students that responded here are just simply going without. And those that are often making a pretty significant financial commitment. Remembering that a textbook can be $250. That's the difference between a couple of psychology appointments each term, which can make a big difference to a student's life. So it tells us that affordability is a real concern. And then this is a slide that shows you turnaways. So turnaways are when a student goes to access an ebook that the library has subscribed to, but the commercial publishers that we are subscribing to that book from place limitations on how many people can be using the resource concurrently. So this particular textbook is a core textbook for like one of those massive courses where there's like 1,000 students per offering. And we have 24 copies of 24 licenses for concurrent use of the ebook and 11 in print in the library. And even still, we can see these spikes of students in March of 2023. 120 students were turned away from accessing a library copy of that textbook. So even when students in good faith are trying to access textbooks, they're still being turned away. And so licensing models do not meet student needs, and that's a problem. I mean, even down here where we've got in July, or February 2024, we've got 2 students who were turned away. That's 2 students too many. We need every student to have access to the resources that they need to succeed. So we know that OER are important because they can be an alternative to textbooks. They can save money for students and they can increase access, which is what those previous 2 slides were about. Research also tells us that OER tend to correlate with higher student and faculty satisfaction and equal, if not better, learning outcomes. Although it is difficult to measure quantitatively the impact of OER for all the complexities of measuring something that involves human beings like learning. And then there's emerging research to say and that's just for textbook replacement alone. If we start leveraging the opportunities that OER give us as educators to do that fun stuff like remixing or having students generating their own content and licensing it openly and sharing it openly, new research is suggesting that we tend to see higher engagement, higher student motivation, and a greater connection to learning. So OER, they're great. And so when we are doing those things, in that we're here in this second bit, we call that OER-enabled pedagogy, which is basically teaching and learning that involves some combination of these things in the pink, either retaining, and there's, I guess, sorry, I'm getting excited. I'm going to slow down. It's a relatively new concept. And I guess there are those who think, okay, well, maybe they have to be doing all of those things for it to be OER-enabled pedagogy. I think it's more of a menu. But I guess I want to really reinforce the point that OER are not just about replacing textbooks with more affordable, accessible options. There's also an opportunity for so much more from a learning perspective. And in practice, OER can look like adopting an OER as a supplementary resource. We'd love to see more of that in the Deakin Library. We'd love to see more people just trying out an OER on their reading list and seeing how it goes, maybe for a whole year, maybe for 2 years, and maybe in the 3rd year, they're like, okay, now I'm ready to replace a textbook. And maybe a little bit further down the line, they're adapting it for their local context, or even better, they're having their students write the case studies, like in the example that we heard before from John. And then there's creation, which is creating something new from scratch, which you can do with or without students. And then just to reinforce the point, if you haven't gotten, I'll just drive it home. OER is good for learning, no matter how you slice it. Whether, whatever lens you choose to look at learning, OER-enabled pedagogy can support that theory or belief of learning. And I'm not going to read all this out to you, just believe me that it's there. And me and my buddy Chatty G worked on this together to sort of illustrate the point that, like many other methodologies out there that we love and know as educators, OERs can support great learning, whatever your theory of learning or belief is. All right, that's my lightning talk about OER. Now you all know how great OER are and why they're important. I'm going to get into I'm going to tell you a little bit about Scylla and what we learned about Scylla. So you might be wondering, what the heck is Scylla? Scylla is a searching tool. So usually when you're looking for a resource, maybe you go to Google Scholar, or maybe you go to your library website and use the discovery tool in the library. And that's great, but it can involve a lot of sifting. And, we know that people don't necessarily go past the second or third page of Google. So you may be not seeing results that could be great for you if that's your discovery method. So Scylla is a discovery tool. It's basically like a search engine that matches commercial resources or syllabi and suggests OER that match with that. And I'm going to show you some screenshots. I didn't want to deal with a live demo, but I will show you some screenshots. So Scylla sort of sell themselves. They're a startup. They're not altruistic or philanthropic. They're a commercial entity. They purport that their tool addresses all of the issues, that searching is time confusing, that OER are scattered across the world, the wind, that OER are varied in their modality, and sometimes the quality of OER can be variable. And they say that they're going to solve all those problems with their tool. And it is AI, just to be very clear. It's an AI tool. So this is what it looks like. I log into Scylla, and it's a very simple interface. I have a couple of options. I can add a book, and that is, I can add or search for a book that I'm already familiar with, and it'll find it through the ISBN. It'll go out into the internet and it'll pull the chapter names and the chapter summaries, and then it'll find similar OER to replace it. Or I can upload a course syllabus with learning outcomes, and it will suggest OER that similar courses from around the world that have shared their course syllabi, it'll suggest the OER that those other courses are using. So I'm going to show you an example of adding a book. I didn't actually. Okay, so I did this a couple of days ago. Understanding Second Language Acquisition is a core textbook that I used in my master's and PhD by Lourdes Ortega, and so I stuck that book in with its ISBN and I searched for it, and it said, all right, there's no one OER that is going to replace that textbook in its entirety, but what we do have is a bunch of other books where you might be able to mix and match chapters. So it suggested some chapters. And then I can click on that and it'll give me 4, say the age and language learning chapter in Ortega's textbook. It's going to suggest, here are some options. And then I, as the subject matter expert, have to go and verify the output. All right, so that's Scylla. And I know that I'm running out of time. So the library basically, led by Danny Johnson, who's the director of the Outreach and Scholarly Services Directorate, and Angie Williamson, who is a librarian in open education, they started a 12-month collaboration with Scylla in March. So we're 6 months in. And we've done a lot of stuff in that partnership. It's really been working with Scylla, both to trial the tool and suggest development improvements. And this is what we learned. I think this is what kind of the meat and bones of the presentation is. The AI is definitely helpful in identifying OER. There's no doubt about it. It definitely cuts back on the amount of time. The matching works well, provided human review is happening. So it's a tool. It's not a service. It's a tool that can be used to support an overarching service. There are limitations, but yes, to answer the questions that you asked before, it does save time. But service is everything. Its success is going to hinge on who's using the tool. So learning designers who have access to this, this is not going to replace you. This is going to be one more tool to put in your toolkit. But building relationships is super important. For example, this has been a great opportunity for us to reestablish relationships with the learning designers at Deakin. And we need to think about what's next. And then lastly, I guess, working with a startup, as you would expect, has pros and cons. And especially with this one, for example, they have some ideas that are coming out of this a bit out of left field because they're new and they're excited. And whereas we kind of want them to like slow down and just like refine the tool as it stands. So we did learn that. Now, Sharon and Hank, should I stop now? Because it's 1 o'clock.
It is 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
Probably. Unfortunately, sorry about that, Lauren. I would be very happy for you to carry on, but
I'm sorry that I wasn't more concise.
no,
I think
no,
I rambled on about OER because I got
you
excited.
did not ramble. This is good. Are there any questions? I've a quick question, which is just about the take up, essentially, because it sounds to me like the way you're talking about it, and you did a really good job of talking about it in a very positive way. So I can't really see any downsides to OER.
Oh, I definitely did not mean to sell it
No, but it's
as a panacea. It's not that. If I had the time to show a live demo, I would show you some other examples of when I've plugged in books that I'm really familiar with. Like I plugged in one about research and education or something else, and it gave me something where there were similar words, but it was actually about something completely different. So it's definitely cannot replace a subject matter expert thoughtfully and carefully considering the appropriateness of a resource. It's really just a tool, and it's not as great as you would maybe think it could be.
right.
It's all about the service,
but
and it's all about the human
question was
verification.
the tool itself, like so the Scylla, does that help to increase the use of OER resources in since you've been using this, have you seen a shift in take up?
No, because it's only been 6 months.
Right.
We're barely into the trial. The pilot,
Okay.
at the end of the pilot, we might have a little bit more data.
Mhm.
I think we haven't seen that yet.
All right. Thank you. I am aware that we're out of time. So I just wanted to thank you, Lauren. That was great. And thanks, Rachel and John as well, and Sharon. So thank for everyone for coming.